Hey, welcome to the second part of Shawn babbling about the Beatles. This might be the last part. It's definitely going to be the last part for now. If there's enough conversation or questions, I might decide to just keep talking about the Beatles, because if you can't tell, I seem to have some kind of bizarre encyclopedic knowledge of them. I guess I do know why. Big fan. So, last time I talked about kind of the way I was a fan when I was little, and I had trouble finding people in, say, elementary school who shared my fandom. And I also talked about the Beatles movies. What I did not mention is that the Beatles actually invented, kind of, the format of the music video. When they stopped touring in 1965, and they did stop touring in 1965, they said, no more live shows, these girls are freaking crazy, we can't hear anymore. Because so much screaming, they could not hear themselves singing, playing their instruments, anything. They quit in 1965, and they stopped appearing on live TV because so many people wanted them, like, all over the place. So what they started doing was they started sending a video package of them performing a song. So there is a music video, yeah, I'm sure you can find it online, of Strawberry Fields. There is a music video of Hey Bulldog. And this was like 1967, 68. This was 15 years before MTV even existed. This was way before people were even thinking of doing stuff like this. People had lip syncing in movies. Like lots of bands and singers made movies. Elvis was in movies. And you would lip sync and whatever, but it was just part of the plot of a movie. It wasn't like its own standalone 3.5-4 minute thing. And the Beatles did that. And I don't know whose idea it was. I don't know if it was the record label or one of them or what. But essentially they made the music video. And the thing I want to spend most of this video is talking about, and the other most important thing in the Beatles, is understanding the scope of their discography. They released their first album in 1963. It's called Please Please Me. It has many songs on it that you probably haven't heard unless you're a diehard fan, because they just got kind of lost to the ether. Several of them are covers. There aren't any like standout songs. In fact, they didn't have a #1 hit, which is why they refused to come to America until 1964, when they released Meet the Beatles, which is that famous album with them all half in light, half in dark on the cover. The #1 song on that album, of course, was Hold Your Hand. Very good. I heard someone in the back say it. When that hit #1 in America, they came to the Ed Sullivan Show, February 9th, 1964. Don't ask me why I know that. I just do. And that was their first American TV performance. Again, could barely hear themselves, but whatever. So, if you're a Beatles fan, I would say most Beatles fans don't listen to the whole catalog. I don't. I certainly don't. Those earlier records are fine. I'm not going to say like Please Please Me or Meet the Beatles, or I don't even know what other albums were back there. Hard Day's Night, kind of. I'm not going to say that they're crap, because they're not. They're still Beatles, but there's a lot on there that was kind of mandated by their record company. There was a lot on there that was just kind of, they were just kind of asked/forced to do. If you go BitTorrent hunting, and I don't recommend that you do this because it might be illegal, you will find a German version of I Want to Hold Your Hand. You'll find probably a Spanish version. I think there was a German and Spanish version recorded. And they had to learn all the words. They learned all the sounds for the words and then kind of stumbled through it. So I don't like that earlier stuff. I guess I should put it on this side of the screen. We're doing left right. I don't like that earlier stuff as much. What I like is the later stuff. If you start with like Rubber Soul, which has songs like Norwegian Wood and I'm a Loser and 8 Days a Week. 8 Days a Week is a fantastic song. It has so many things in it that you just don't even... First of all, oh my God, I'm getting so excited. 8 Days a Week starts with a fade in. I don't even know if before 1965 that had ever been done. I forget which album I Feel Fine is on. Actually, it might not even have been an album. They used to release, there were several songs, Beatles songs, that were singles that literally aren't on an album because that's just the way they used to do things. For instance, Penny Lane is not on a Beatles album. It was just a 45. It was just released as a single. So anyway, I Feel Fine starts with, if you haven't heard it, hopefully you know what I'm talking about. It starts with this boom, and that weird sound that I was making, the boom, is the first instance of feedback recorded ever. Ever. It was the first time anyone thought, like, oh, that feedback sound could be used as part of the music. And the reason it happened, of course, was an accident. Like, one day, George walked out of the recording booth, put his guitar down facing the amp, and he happened to hit the E chord, the E string. And as he was walking away, it started to feed back into the amp, because that's what happens. And John, because John was always the one who was looking for like something weird that sounded cool, was like, whoa, what's going on there? Let's do that. Let's make that a song. And they did. And that's how I Feel Fine happened. So anyway, Rubber Soul on, we're going to go this way. Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, The White Album, Let It Be. Those are like those are the 5 essential Beatles albums to me. And Let It Be is kind of, let me explain Let It Be. All the previous albums were produced by a man named George Martin. He's a genius. He is the 5th Beatle. If you ever hear of the 5th Beatle, they're talking about George Martin. George Martin was a producer at Abbey Road Studios, and he always did like orchestras and string symphonies, and like he recorded that kind of stuff. And one day the Beatles came in, and I don't know who kicked him over to the Beatles and was like, let George handle them, but they did. And I would say George is primarily responsible for their success. Clearly, Lennon, McCartney, Harrison are geniuses. Ringo plays the drums, he's fine. But without the right producer, they wouldn't have gone anywhere. And he was the right producer for them. But by the time they got to 1967-8, they were fighting so much, all the time. They just hated each other's guts that he said, you guys are making another record, I'm not making it with you, I'm out of here. So he took a break and he made other stuff. And they hired Phil Spector. If you don't know who Phil Spector is, he is one of the most prolific producers of Motown. He is also currently on trial, or I don't know what stage it's in right now. He has been under investigation, on trial, blah blah blah, since like 1960 something for the murder of someone. I don't really know, because Phil Spector is such a marginal part in the Beatles story that I just don't care about him. Anyway, he ruined Let It Be, basically. They hired him to produce it, and he just he wasn't George Martin, basically. He didn't really know what to do with it. He had ideas that he wanted to make work that they didn't let him make work. For instance, the song I Mean Mine, which is a George Harrison song. It's about 75 seconds long, then there's like a bridge, then that 75 seconds seems to repeat, and in fact, it does. Phil Spector didn't know how to make a whole song out of it, and instead of asking George to write more, or, just removing it from the album, he decided to like make this mishmash of music, and then just like take this whole section of a song and duplicate it again on the end and add a fade out and call it a song. And that's what that is. So in the 2000s, like 2002 something, there was a version of that album, Let It Be, released called Let It Be Naked, which is a stripped down, unproduced, very simple version of that album, which I think is far superior to the original. And whenever I listen to Let It Be, I'm going to listen to that one. So those 5 albums, I would say if you are a Beatles newbie and you're interested in getting into them, start with something like the White Album. The White Album is so dense and there's so much to it that you could just go through that Wikipedia article reading and listening to that music, and it would take you days to really completely absorb everything that went into the making of that album, because it's an accomplishment. It sits above what people call an album today. Sgt. Pepper, I would say, is an excellent album. It's my personal favorite just because of the particular arrangement of songs, and these ones in particular. The White Album, I would say, is their greatest accomplishment. And I would call it their greatest accomplishment because it is four people somehow managing to work on a piece of art together that all hate each other's guts. They hated each other. Ringo quit the band for 2 weeks during the making of the White Album. He said, screw it, you guys never let me play the drums. Seriously, they didn't let him play. If you listen to Back in the USSR, he couldn't play it. He tried over and over and over to play it, and Paul, who wrote the song, it's always credited to Lennon and McCartney, but you can usually tell which one of them wrote it. Paul wrote Back in the USSR, and he kept demanding Ringo to do, I don't know, something that Ringo couldn't or wouldn't. And eventually Paul did it himself. So Ringo does not appear on that song at all. For all the fantastic drums that are in that song, it's all Paul. And that's just the way the band often was. A lot of them fighting over who should play which parts. On the album Abbey Road, which I didn't mention in my 5, and I probably should have. My 5 should be 6, probably. On the album Abbey Road, the song Oh Darling, again another Paul song, he's screaming in that song. Like, he's hitting the highest end of his spectrum as loud as he can. And George was like, Paul, you're killing yourself. Would you please just let John sing this song? Because John could get up there. And Paul absolutely refused to do it. And he just did it over and over and over, take after take after take, until he got what you hear on the album. And so the White Album is really, it's an amazing accomplishment in the furious mess that was the Beatles. So I don't know what time I'm at, but I think that's going to wrap up my babbling about the Beatles. I hope that you didn't watch me while I was doing this and you just put my face behind another screen and listened to me, because this was boring. But I plan on rambling about some other topics. I seem to be getting better at it, and I don't mind doing it, and you guys seem to find it interesting. So the Beatles was a very personal, that's something I know a lot about, so I felt like I could do it for about half an hour, and I think I did. Whoops. But if there are any other topics, obviously I'm really big into movies. There are plenty of other things in the music field that I'm interested in. There are plenty of things in the computer-related field that I could babble about. Just let me know. And now I gotta get up and turn off the camera. Thanks, guys.